Welcome to Will at Work. I am Kevin. Today we're looking at the Radofin Tele-Sports III. We did look at briefly the Tele-Sports IV, and this came before it, obviously. And this was another one of the 1292 systems, right? So when we were transitioning from standalone Pong to cartridge-based systems, and we had the cartridge containing the processor, General Instruments had released a design. I think it was General Instruments. I'll explain that in a second. They had released a design which allowed you to put the games, on each, were on each processor, and put it on a cartridge, put it in the system. We've talked about that in this series before. And this is one of those units. This is a PAL version of it, and I just kind of wanted to show this to you. The thing about collecting systems like I do is there's a difference between collecting, say, clones, which I don't count for the most part as a game, like a system in my collection. That's not always true, but it's mostly true. What I try to do is I try to find things that have unique games on them, basically. If you've got at least one unique type of game, then, that certainly deserves a spot in my collection. But if you came out with something called, like, Game Lad, let's say, and the Game Lad was capable of playing Game Boy games, then, and it had the same everything that the Game Boy had, it's just called Game Lad, that's not unique enough for my collection, right? Now, if something happened where Game Lad was, like, really popular or something, and everybody had the Game Lad, or something, there's some nostalgia purposes there. Maybe I would get one for that purpose, but for the most part, I try not to get too many clones is into my system. Where it sort of differs, I guess, with me is that like the manufacturing of the 70s and early 80s with these different companies building these different sort of controllers and console cases with these different arrangement of buttons is really kind of interesting to me. Everything today is just a D-pad and some buttons, where back then they were doing a lot of inventive, crazy things and trying to see what worked and what didn't. And a lot of these companies didn't survive, and they have like a certain amount of history. They released like 1, 2, 3, some people released 6 different units, and then the company tanked or got out of this business and decided to sell camera parts or something. And so it's like, that's kind of an interesting little history there when you're looking at, like, they dipped their toe in the water of selling game systems and being a game company. And here's a game company in the 70s, and what if they would have gone in this direction or that direction, it would have been a little bit different. You know what I'm saying? And so that's different than just like a knockoff clone kind of thing that's coming out of China, etc. And there are some other variations of things that I sometimes scratch my head over. Like, there's times when some of these consoles, like for instance some of the joystick ones, like with Jack Specific, but also others, where they take the games and they strip off the copyrights and they change the names of the game, and it's still sort of the same game, but so those are like, yeah, that's just they just stole the game and just ripped the stuff off. But then there's things like, for instance, in like one of the handheld arcade games, I don't know if it was from Arcade 1-Up or At Games or whoever, whoever made it, and there's a version of Dig Dug on it, right? And the version of Dig Dug, it isn't right. Like, it's not correct. It's like it has like this, like for instance in Dig Dug you could like sit underneath a boulder that you had just dug, and the boulder will stay there until you move out from under it, and then it'll fall on an enemy. That's in the normal game. But in the variant that was on the handheld, The version of Dig Dug that they had on there didn't do that, right? Same with like some of the other ones, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. You could only play as like Donatello, I think, and you couldn't play with the other ones. And it wasn't actually the arcade game. It wasn't the NES version. It's like some version that they just sort of made for that handheld, and that's unique. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying anybody wants to play that sort of thing. But I am saying it's kind of unique, and that's really kind of interesting. That, you know, there's this one variant game that's totally different than all the other games, and it's only on this one platform. And it's like, in the history of video gaming, that's kind of unique enough that probably should be collected and kept. You know, or it's all that crap probably ends up on emulators or something. But I don't know, emulating, you know, and then the hardware to me versus software emulation. There's nothing wrong with software emulation. Obviously, we've gone through my collection. I have software emulators, you know, just like everybody else. But games were programmed to work with specific hardware, and when they were designed and play tested, they were play tested to be used with specific controllers and the timings of a specific console. And emulators have gotten really good on the timing, especially with older game systems, you know, NES, Atari 2600, things of that nature. And have gotten a lot better with 16-bit systems. The later systems, there's still a lot of work to be done to try to get that all right. But, you know, games are playable, etc. But the same experience, not necessarily. You know, you can play N64 games, emulated, you know, but it would really help to have the actual N64 controller in your hand when you're playing them, etc. So, you know, I have a thing where the hardware, I think, is sort of unclonable in a way. Like, uncopyable. You can't just 3D print one of these at this point in time. Maybe in the future we'll have replicators, and you can just replicate it. Radofin Tele-Sports III. But, you know, we're not there. And so I feel like this hardware is old and rare enough that it should be collected. And it's, you know, if it's certainly unique in that way. So systems like this, though, because it's the 1292 system, I sit there and I scratch my head. Should I count this as one that's unique in my collection, or should I not? I probably will, because it's the same with the Pong systems. Like, a lot of those Pong systems are basically the same, but they're not exactly clones. And that gets back into the whole thing of it, like, being like, they're all first-party systems. Like, they're all using the same microchips, but they're still first-party systems. And so it's sort of like, Nintendo releases 6 different colors of the Switch, etc. I guess I'm not going to collect all 6 different colors of the Switch, but if there was 6 different Switches from 6 different manufacturers, I don't know, maybe? I don't know. It just sort of depends. Like, I don't really care to go out and get a Sanyo 3DO or anything, just because I have the Panasonic one. But, yeah, I don't know. And that's just the debate in the brain on how these things, how you collect these things. And it doesn't really matter to anybody but me. It's my collection. It's my list. But I do try to think about the history of the game systems and their sort of place in the history of video games. I think it's kind of important. So anyway, what I was saying about this one is that this is a PAL system, and it's a 1292 is General Instruments, so it was sort of like the early days, like a 3DO of that time. And there's also the Gemini with instead of a GE, it's a GI. It's like a Gemini, which was also around that same time. And the Gemini used Signets, something like that, Signetic microprocessors rather than General Instruments. And they eventually, went to programmable chips, which enabled them to then create unisonic, I forget the number on that one, 1270 something, 17 something, 1170, I don't know. One of them numbered ones or whatever that plays cards. It's rare, and I think it's more or less a prototype, and it's out there. And then eventually that became the Intellivision, but they also had cartridge-based systems just like this that played processor games on the card. And then you had the sort of hybrid systems like the Cassette Vision, which I don't know if they used Signetics chips or if they used General Instruments chips or some other chips to make their Pong and race car games and all that sort of stuff. But then they would also end up using NEC chips for their programmable ROM in their early video games. So all of this is really interesting in terms of, like, to me anyway, of the history of gaming and how everything got started out and where it all began. And so I try to collect what I think is somewhat interesting and good for the collection. We're not going to look at this one, though, because we have looked at a 1292 before. It's Pong. I would like to see if it works, but this particular unit doesn't have a cartridge. I do have cartridges for, this that would likely fit, because we've looked at the 1292 before. Just that I don't have those on hand right now, and so and I'm not too worried about it, if this one particularly works or not works. I bought this one really cheap. It was only $15. And so, I'm just going to, store it away, and, we'll look on. I'll probably add this to the list, to the count, because more or less kind of like another Pong system. But, yeah, Radofin Tele-Sports III, it's just part of history. Radofin, Hanimex, I think there was like a audio something, Unisonic, a lot of these companies that you never heard of before, but they were a big deal back in the late 70s, making stuff out. And we've got a couple more we're probably going to look at from around the world before too long here on this list as we start to wrap this whole list up and finish it off. So at least, slow it down, let's say, because there's always new consoles coming. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next video.